From the
I don't know what to say. I'm just speechless.
To the we see all sorts of life-changing moments at McKinney Competitions. How would you react? Cars, houses, tech bundles and more from just £2 a ticket. No purchase necessary. For competitions, rules and conditions, see mckinneycompetitions.com.
You'd think that people wouldn't want to talk to you about this, but I think because we weren't journalists, because we were playwrights, that there was an openness to that, and that I really, really appreciated that. I found it very heartwarming for people to want to share their stories and not feel like it was a burden. Well, we found that it was very ripe for humour. That kind of satire or that kind of joke. What if this happened and this happened, and then suddenly we're making jokes about Michael Collins ending, World War II quicker because of his guerrilla war techniques, and fighting for the British Empire, where De Valera joining the Nazi Party. And progression that has happened in the last few years, it's all happened because of grassroots organisations and people, everyday people, just pushing for these things, and then at some point the politicians jump on the bandwagon.
Hi everyone, this is your host Elaine Ingram, and that was the voice of Warrenpoint playwright, director and filmmaker Oisín Kearney. You may know him from the TV show My Left Nut, or you'll have heard some of his sketches on Soft Border Patrol. Oisín has a fantastic new play running in the Lyric Theatre right now called The Border Game, and today he tells us all about that and a whole lot more besides.
Hi, Oisín.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can, Elaine. How are you?
Brilliant. How are you?
Too bad, eh?
It's been a bit of a, first of all, a huge congratulations on My Left Nut winning the awards, and as well as that, obviously, Border Game, starting the show starting at the Lyric, and I was luckily enough, I saw it the other night, and there was absolutely no hesitation with everybody giving it a standing ovation straight away. Everybody just stood up at the end. It was absolutely brilliant.
I know, really happy with how everything's gone, and had a really busy and eventful week last week. So yeah, it was just great to see the audience reaction to the play, and I hope that the audiences to come enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely deserves to get audiences in there, and it's lovely to be back in the theatre for starters, but it really is well worth seeing, and it's a collaboration between you and Michael Patrick.
That's right.
Yeah, who I suppose you were telling me earlier that he could join us because he's to babysit, so all the glitz and glamour that we all think, when you're out winning awards and everything, reality bites.
No, you have to make sure you're keeping up with family as well, don't you?
Yeah.
But he couldn't do tonight, unfortunately. But he sends his thanks for coming and your kind words.
Yeah, no, I really thought it was great. But we'll get back to that later on. I suppose we could just start off with you. I mean, you're from Warrenpoint, and you went to the college, did you?
I did. I went to St. Coleman's, yeah.
Went to St. Coleman's, yeah. And how did you get involved in writing and directing in the first place? I mean, where did it come from, your family, or?
Well, mum and dad and 3 brothers as well. Like, we would have all, we would have encouraged each other, especially with making music, and then also with the Donal and Brendan were great at the sport as well, and then just doing a bit of drama and plays and things. We all were members of New Point Youth.
Oh, you were. My daughter did that this year.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah. No, it's fantastic, and I'm glad to see that through COVID, they're still managing to figure out ways to get the young ones together and in a safe way. So yeah, we all went through that, and that was started by Sean Hollywood, obviously, and that was kind of the start of a love of storytelling, I guess, and a love of drama. And did all that through school, also did like school plays and things. And then I went off and studied in England study politics.
I was going to ask you. I was going to say you had to have politics. You had to have studied politics somewhere along the line.
Well, I think sometimes growing up where we're from, it's you almost that's a degree in politics in itself.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
You can't really escape it. But that was sort of was interested in politics and flirted with the idea of journalism and things like that, and then just on the side just started doing some directing and writing, and kind of that's where it all started, and just kept that up really until it became almost a full-time job.
Yeah. And you met Michael Patrick in Cambridge. That's where you went to university? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So when I was in,
and is that his real name?
So his real name is Michael. Michaal Patrick is his stage name. Yeah,
yes,
two first names, but his real name is Michael Campbell.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of actors, because Mick is a primarily an actor.
Yeah.
A lot of actors, you need to find a name that can register as your own, so that you can credit yourself that way. And I think there was another Michael Campbell already.
Yeah.
So hence Michael Patrick was born.
So the two of you obviously hit it off straight away. I mean, you have a very unique sense of humor, the way you write and everything. I mean, there has to be a naturalness to that you must bounce. I mean, there's very Python-esque and, even South Park and that type of thing in there,
Yeah.
You must obviously, I'd say nights out with you must have been some crack. Hilarious.
I don't know. Yeah, we definitely, when we hit it off when we first met, and what drew us together, I suppose, was we were running the Ireland Society together. So whenever you're in England, you kind of gravitate towards other people, other Irish people, and we ran the society together, which was essentially just a front for arranging meals and like going out for drinks and things.
Yeah.
Under the guise of culture. But
that's Irish culture. Yeah.
Exactly. But then he started doing a bit more acting, and I was directing, and I directed him in a few plays, and we formed a relationship as a kind of a creative partnership of actor and director. But it was only after university I came back to Belfast. He went to London for a bit, and then he came back, and I think then we started to make shows together as director and actor again. But then it was only a few years later that we did our first play, My Left Nut, and that was actually the first thing we had written together.
And that was autobiographical for him, was it? Or semi-autobiographical, and he acted. Is it true that he said to you, you formed a company then, and he said, like, will you write something for me because I've no jobs?
That was it. I mean, he basically he applied for this scheme called Show in a Bag, which is run by Fish Amble, new play company in Dublin. And he didn't have any work at the time, so an actor needs to make their own work. So he had this story that we went to the pub, and he told me the story of what happened to him when he was 15 years old, which is essentially his testicles swelled up to the size of a Coke can, and it was this thing called a Hydrocele, which essentially I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it's a buildup of fluid caused by a defective absorbing membrane. But he was terrified at the time. He thought it was something really malignant. He thought it was dangerous, and actually the way he told the story, like, it was so funny. I was kind of almost on the ground laughing, but also it was clear that whatever was going on with him related deeply to the loss of his father, because he lost his dad when he was 8 years old, and it was just a really beautiful, almost ready-made story that he asked me to help him to script it, and that's sort of where we started off. We just played with ideas. He would write a bit, and then we'd bring it into the room and play with it, and eventually get it down on paper.
Yeah, and it did really well at the Fringe.
It did, yeah. People really were receptive to it. It did really well in Belfast and in Dublin Fringe, and then we took to Edinburgh Fringe, and people loved it as well. Yeah.
And then it was adapted, for the BBC so anybody who hasn't seen it, I mean, I've seen it, and it really is fantastic. It's got that lovely mixture of, it's actually quite refreshing to see, this coming of age sort of story from boys' perspective, and I tell you, it's warts and all, like it really is.
Yeah.
But things like that, like there's a really strong, important message, especially for men's health, and for young boys, and to see what it's like going through puberty and that age, because you do see quite a lot of stuff about young girls growing up, but not so much boys. I mean, I know there's Adrian Mole and that kind of thing, but and it was a mixture of being like funny and just teens and the usual drama, but also that poignant story of him not having a father figure there that he could speak to and relate to.
Well, I think, yeah, for us, it was really important that first and foremost, it was about a young man growing up and without a father figure, or without an influence that could sort of steer you, how to be a man. Because I think that if this was around the conversations of toxic masculinity, and that's all still very relevant today as we, sort of gender politics is shifting. And I suppose it was our contribution to how it is for a young boy growing up in this place, and the sensitivity of young men.
Yeah.
That we don't feel that maybe we can talk about certain things, but we're just as sensitive, and we just need to give language to that. And I think that Mick's story was perfect for that, and it's got all of that, stupid, silly teenage humor, like, and a very a scene that I can't believe it. He actually shared like very personal details with me, but there's a scene in there which is essentially a first attempt at masturbation, and yes, it's all a bit of fun, but it really that scene, I swear to God. But it's done, I think we do it in a very playful way, and there's nothing shown, or it's all tasteful. But I think it's trying to show, okay, so this is something funny that we don't really talk about, but then in the midst of that is something serious that you could find something down there that you don't know what it is, and it's very scary, and it could actually could save your life to just speak to someone about that and not be afraid to talk about medical issues or emotional issues that you might be having.
No, I really it is well worth checking out. Anybody can see it on BBC, and you just won an award for it as well, so that's brilliant. And then, like, the next thing you did, I want to talk about the alternative.
Sure,
That's now that's a really interesting premise, because if you want to explain, I know the timeline starts in 1912, and it's an alternative where there's no border.
Yeah.
So you maintain that Ireland would become it still belongs to the UK, it belongs to Britain. So Ireland, obviously, all the names of the street, Sackville Street and everything is still as it was, red letterboxes and the whole lot.
Exactly, yeah.
But you also think that that Britain, because Ireland would be part of the Commonwealth and stuff like that we'd have we'd have GAA World Cups and things like that.
Yeah, that was all a bit of crack. I mean, that was very much because of a company, Fish Amble, who were really supportive of My Left Nut as well. They held a Play for Ireland initiative, which was essentially they made a call out for playwrights to submit ideas to sort of have a State of the Nation play, or something that Irish audiences would want to see at that time, and that was 2018, 2019. So for us, it was very hard not to write something that was a reaction to what was going on politically. Brexit was kicking off then, and the uncertainties around that, but also the Scottish independence referendum as well. So the alternative was an idea that, what if Ireland had never left the United Kingdom? What if the third Home Rule Bill had been passed, and could the course of Ireland have gone in a very different direction that would have avoided things like partition, would have avoided things like the supremacy of the Catholic Church in the Irish state, and therefore what kind of social policies would be different, how would society have changed, and then that comes down to very specific things like you've mentioned, like red letterboxes, or what parties would be, would it be the Conservatives and Labour, or would Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil not even exist if the Civil War hadn't happened?
Yeah, I suppose they wouldn't.
Yeah, so it was, once we sort of came up with the idea, we were like really excited about it, and the rabbit hole went deep.
I was going to say, when you start having branches of, but if this, then there's like the knock-on effect, So it's like the butterfly effect, basically, where it's like, so that could go on forever. So I suppose you have to have some point where you say, right.
Yeah. Well, we found that it was very ripe for humor, that kind of satire, or that kind of joke, what if this happened and this happened, and then suddenly we're making jokes about Michael Collins ending, World War II quicker because of his guerrilla war techniques, and fighting for the British Empire, or De Valera, joining the Nazi Party and stuff like that. And it just things to really twist the knife into kind of contemporary debate around Irish politics. And what we did find was that if 1916 Easter Rising had never happened, or if it would have happened, it wouldn't have been on the same scale, because independence would already have been achieved in a sense within the United Kingdom, within the Commonwealth. Then people like Padraig Pearse wouldn't have been held up as these great figures. They would have just been, another footnote in history. And just playing with those ideas of like who is important and what events we take as really important events that shape our culture. That was just very playful and allowed us to, get into the nitty gritty of how politics changes places and how we vote. And I suppose the question was like, we were all looking at Scotland, kind of thinking, how's the independence referendum going to go? How did the English people vote for Brexit? But if something had happened differently in our history, maybe Irish people wouldn't be the same as we are now, and maybe we wouldn't vote the way that we think we would, So it's just kind of lots of playful concepts, and at the end of the day, it was all a bit of crack, and I think the audiences really liked it.
Yeah,
which is great. The Cork audience was fantastic, because there's so many jibes about Cork being the royal city and all that, and
the real capital of Ireland and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you were influenced by people, I don't know, like Philip Roth, and he's written about that, and there's other things about the obvious one about if Hitler had have won the war, if the Nazis had have won the war, and Fatherland, yeah,
Robert Harris, that was great. And there's just a really great opening sequence to Fatherland, the film, where it sort of just does an archive kind of timeline of everything that's different, that's changed. That was definitely an influence on us. How do you tell 100 years of fake history,
Yeah.
And get people to buy into it in that world building? That was really.
But you have like, you can do what you like, really, because you can take it whatever direction you see fit, as well as that. So you do have that freedom when you're creating alternative history, I suppose, Yeah. And speaking of film, then your film debut, I mean, took you away from Ireland, because what's it called? I can't pronounce it now. Bohaya.
Bohaya.
I knew it wasn't going to be a pronounceable J.
Bohaya is
Colombia.
It's a small area department in a region of Chocó in Colombia. So it's this kind of jungle area that is very much forgotten within the country of Colombia, never mind internationally. But there in 2002, they had basically one of the worst atrocities of the Colombian conflict, when a church full of civilians was caught in the crossfire between the FARC guerrillas and the right-wing paramilitaries, and just, over 100 people were killed. And it's just an atrocity that kind of marks the human cost of war and the fight over resources. So it was something that obviously was very different to anything be making in Ireland, but still the kind of the conflict and the way that sort of these conflicts kind of become repetitious and just keep going on and on and on was something that drew me to that story. Yeah, I made a lot of connections with it. Sort of felt very felt almost like, you know, the Oma bomb of Colombia in a way. It's just totally unjustified and totally, you know, just so sad an event.
It's the story of the survivor, was it? It was a survivor, his story.
Yeah.
But a lot of his family died.
Well, his name's Leonard Palacios, and he was a social activist.
He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner too, isn't he?
Yeah, well, he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize,
he was
but
nominated.
He was nominated, and he was given a special mention. The president of Colombia actually won it, and he very much used Leonard as the poster boy. You know, Leonard's a Afro-Colombian, very humble man, and he lost 32 relatives, close relatives in that church in that day. And now he's continuing just to fight for some kind of recognition for, you know, rights, because there's victims who never really got any financial, you know, support after that. They also have a lot of psychological and mental health issues. They have a lot of physical issues, you know, with bits of shrapnel and things that were caught in them. And so he's just kind of fighting for the rights of the victims of Bohea, but also in more general terms, the rights of you know, Black Colombians in Colombia, who are very much pushed to the edges and kind of, you know, forgotten about. So it's just the film would told the story of the massacre from the viewpoints of the victims, but also told his kind of modern day story as the Colombian peace process started to sort of disintegrate around him.
For you now making a film, what is the difference? Is it a lot different doing a film and doing a play? You know, did you find what do you prefer? Or
it depends. It depends really what the subject matter is and kind of what you know, what you kind of want to set out to achieve. I think particularly with documentary, you know, you very much you have your camera and you turn it on and you talk to a real person and you don't really know where the story's going to go.
Yeah.
So it's very it can be very exciting, but also can be quite terrifying as well in that sense. Whereas I suppose with theatre is, you know, you kind of have control of that, and it's, you know, it's quite. I think theatre is a very safe space to, you know, explore certain issues, because you can have time to craft what the play is and what it's saying, and people coming into that space to engage with it. Whereas I think film is a bit riskier in the sense of, you know, you don't really know what the story's going to be or how it's going to go down, you know.
Get ready to shake up summer with the Get Active ABC Sunshine Fill programme for kids and families. Get set for land-based adventure at our summer schemes, or why not get adventurous and maybe get wet at our Splashtastic Water Sports summer programme. There are so many things to do, and all we need is you. See getactiveabc.com/summer for all the details.
And when you're writing a play now, do you have in your head what way when you find the actors, or when the actors, you know, are reading your words, do you have in your head what way it's going to sound, or would you ever learn from them and say, "Oh God, I never thought it, you know, of it in that way," or would you have a very specific vision of what way you wanted, you know, to come across?
Yeah, I think it's you always have a very clear idea of what it might sound like, but I have to say I never write. A lot of writers would write with an actor in mind, and I've never really done that. It's sort of the character kind of appears, and then you can hear the character, but of course the character doesn't exist until it's played by an actor.
Exactly.
So there's a certain stage in the process whereby an actor comes into the process and starts saying the lines, and you can tell sometimes they might say things you're like, oh, that's not quite right because of this, this, and this. but sometimes they might be bringing something new and fresh and saying things that you hadn't thought about, and it actually elevates everything or clarifies certain things. So it is a collaborative thing. You know, it's not like you need to say it like this. It's very much here's the words, and this is an invitation to start finding this character, because at the end of the day, the character is 50% of the words and 50% of the performance. So it's just finding that kind of marrying those two together. But we were really lucky on the Border game to get two fantastic actors.
Oh my God, they were absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, they were really great.
Yeah.
Patrick McBrearty and Liz Fitzgibbon.
Yeah, Liz Fitzgibbon and Patrick. Yeah, and they really did bring it to life. And the collaboration as well with you and Michael. When you're writing, did you bounce off each other, or do you just bring each other? Do both of you bring different things to the table, or what way does that work, or does that just depend on what it is?
I suppose it depends. I mean, the way we write together kind of changes. Sometimes we do a lot of Zoom calls, so we've been on Zoom a lot over lockdown, to the point where, you know, we just associate each other's faces with work, you know, getting up and doing your work. So we talk through things quite a lot and have long conversations about characters or story or plot or themes, and then we might split it up a bit and say, okay, well, I'm going to try and write this scene and you can try and write that scene, and then we might swap it and look at what we've done and sort of tweak it again. Or then we may have a Google Docs document over and actually both be writing on the same document and almost writing over each other.
Okay, because it doesn't feel like two different writers. It feels like, well, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like...
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I think we do have a common sense of humor and a common sense of what is interesting dramatically and theatrically. So we kind of challenge each other on that. And some days, you know, one of us might take the lead, the other might take a back seat, and vice versa. But it's very much about always pushing it to be entertaining and to work for an audience. Yeah,
I mean, it's certainly... Border game is definitely that. It's very wordy as well. I mean, there's an awful lot of words in that play. I mean, because it's so much dialogue. I mean, and the jokes, because you have to know that a joke's going to hit, and that's all about timing. I suppose that comes down to your actors as well, and their timing was just impeccable. You know, with the punchline has to be just right. But the wonderful thing I loved about it, well, one of the things I loved about it was that it was, you know, it's obviously satirical, and it's obviously really funny, but it's also very, very hard hitting. And especially the second half of the play, it's definitely saying a lot, because it is all about the border and, you know, the effect of the 100 years that the border has had on people and society and relationships and everything. So it's sending a very strong message, but in not a heavy-handed way, if you know what I mean, because that was what I loved about it, was that it wasn't, if you had just gone in there heavy-handed from the start, I don't think it would have worked. But it was the fact that all that humor and the normal stuff was in there as well, you know.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. I think that is important, because, you know, it is a very tough subject matter, and it does require you to go to those dark places. But, you know, we didn't want to just go, here's 100 years of the border and let's tell stories that, you know, are really sad. And, you know, you need to kind of show the light of it as well, and the humor of living on the border, and the stories that come out of that, and the character traits that people have, and just jokes of it. And I think by representing that humanity, then you can fully understand the tragedy of the darker stuff and access it a bit better. I think that was one thing that whenever Michael and I we did sort of a border tour, we went around the border and spoke to...
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
We spoke to, I think we keep saying 100 people because it's rounded off, but I think it was around 100 people. We did about 70 interviews, but some interviews were with full families, and so I think it was about 100 people, and we got lots of great stories, lots of humorous stories, but every single person gave us a nightmare, you know. It it was hard. And this is even young people who we'd spoken to who didn't experience it. They were able to say things that happened to their parents or the stories they were told. So it just felt like with this play that we needed to go there, and we needed to just show and represent the pain that people have felt and that lingers on that borderline. It doesn't mean we have to talk about it every day, but just recognize that there's a lot of pain there for people.
So what, did you just travel? Where did you go? What places did you go? A lot of places around South Armagh and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we did the whole thing. We did the whole 310 miles. We split it up into 3 trips. One of them was, I'm from Warrenpoint, so it was sort of South Down, South Armagh, North Louth, kind of all around there, all around Jonesborough and Crossmaglen and the Coolies and all that. And then the next trip was kind of Monaghan, Clonus, the Dromully Pollop, round to the sort of South Fermanagh, Kilkee Mountain and all that. And, we just tried to speak to as many people as possible from...
Did you just find people, or did you try and arrange to meet people beforehand?
It was a mixture. Did a lot of, planned it for a few months and met a lot of people who then said, oh, you need to speak to this person. So planned it to make sure that we would get a good sort of range of ages and backgrounds and religions and gender and sexuality and things like that. And then they were able to say, you need to speak to this person or speak to this person. So yeah, it was great. And I have to say, people were extremely forthcoming. What we found was, you'd think that people wouldn't want to talk to you about this, but I think because we weren't journalists, because we were playwrights, that there was an openness to that, and I really, really appreciated that. I found it very heartwarming for people to want to share their stories and not feel like it was a burden. And then after that, we did the longest trip was a week. We're going from South Fermanagh, all sort of West Tyrone up to the city of Derry.
And then you realise how crazy the border is when you're crossing back and forward and back and forward.
It's. I always knew it was mad, but like when you actually go and see every part of it, there's always
Google
more.
Maps keeps saying, changing her accent.
Google Maps doesn't know what it's talking about. No. No, it's just there's a road there outside Clonus where you cross the border, as everybody knows probably, but when you drive it, you cross the border like 7 times, and it just shows you how arbitrary it is, and going I was stood in a man's house and he was lying down and the border was going across him, because when he was drinking a glass of wine, so
your work has all been is very heavily influenced. All of most things that you've done are very heavily influenced by the border. And do you think that's because you're actually from the border town yourself? I suppose that makes, and because you're interested in politics, but I suppose the effect that it's had on generations, because your actors, they wouldn't have even been born when any of this is going on, and you yourself, I mean, you're, So it is. I interviewed Kathy Brady there recently. She's
that's right. Yeah, I was listening to that. It was lovely.
Yeah, and she spoke about that because the film that she did, Wildfire, is about the way conflict has travelled through generations, intergenerational trauma and stuff like that. So I suppose it's quite a similar thing in what you found.
Yeah, I think the border's always had an impact. I think it's had an impact on anybody who's grown up around it, and I think that I hadn't really thought about what that impact might be. And, just as I was writing and making things, and it's pretty much everything, it all comes back to your own personal experience growing up. But I suppose what has driven me to start, making stuff about the border is the fact that it's been in the news so much. The last 5 years has been border, and it's very hard not to make something whenever the whole world is talking about it. And yet I don't think they really understand it either. I don't think people who live along the border understand it, so it was trying to speak to people and arrange my own thoughts on the border. That sort of was the main thrust. And hopefully the border game, the play will, just give people a bit of context and a bit of understanding of those things that happened. And, you know, things like the roads being closed, you know, I know that it's kind of known about, but I feel like it's also, you know, when I was talking to Michael about it, you know, the focus of kind of what happened over the last 40, 50 years has been sort of in the cities, but rarely whenever you close a road, you're not just cutting off one side from the other, you're cutting off entire counties from each other, you know, so that these communities can't even go to the pub, you know, together, or, you know, and that has a huge impact. The effects it had in North Leitrim and South Fermanagh, I didn't know any of that, and I felt so ashamed that I didn't know that stuff. And I had to go looking for it by, you know, driving around and speaking to people. But I think it's good to just remind ourselves of like the effects of borders and hard borders and, you know, conflict and what that actually does to communities. It takes those hearts and souls out of them. So, I think it's good to remember these things. And for me, as a young person who only vaguely remembers things like British soldiers and bombs and things like that it still was a real thing for me, and I just want to remind myself that it was real and it's not just some fairy tale that, you know, we're talking about here. And I think further, the two characters, Henry and Sinead, they're kind of processing that as well. You know, that their lives have gone a certain direction and things are hard for them, and some of that has a root cause in where they grew up and where they're from.
Yeah, and the fact that they're from both sides of the fence, pretty much literally. Even the names are telling, you know, Sinead and Henry, you know, obviously. But so they, you know, the struggles that they had in their own relationship because of all of that as well. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it stems from the border. But because all of your work, you know, I was listening to I was telling you earlier that I was listening to this one time on the border, and that's a really hilarious take on all of the true history of the border.
The Radio Ulster comedy series, yeah,
that's really
that was because we collected all these stories, and there were too many to use in the play, obviously, and so luckily the Radio Ulster said they were looking for sort of something to talk about the border, but in a very funny and silly way. Yeah. So we were delighted because there's so many silly stories.
The Protestant tray bakes.
Smuggling them over during foot and mouth. Yeah.
The bad Thursday agreement.
Yeah. No, it's good because we just do silly things, you know, and make really funny characters and jokes out of, you know, things, you know.
But do you think like it's the same as in Border Game? A lot of the humor and a lot of the jokes, there's even a bottle of Buckfast sitting on the stage. A lot of it is very localized. Do you think that you kind of have to be from here to get a lot of the stuff? You know, I don't know how well anything like that would translate, because the people will be scratching their heads and not having, they'd miss a lot of the jokes. I suppose the general theme would be understood, but there's so many things in there that are just so local.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think with the alternative, when we wrote that, I think that it was of a very certain sort of time, and I think probably would be even dated now, and I think is a very Irish play, because you need to know about Irish history to get the jokes. But I think with this play, although it is really local and specific, there's been quite a few English people in to see the play, and they've all, I mean, maybe not all of them, because I haven't spoken to every English person who's seen it, but I was struck by how affected by it they were. Almost more so because they kind of know the story, but then this kind of told them a bit more about things that they didn't know happened. And I think that, you know, with Brexit and the border being all the news, that I feel like English people maybe have an interest in the border now more than they might have had before, or they might be open to learning a bit more about it, because they want to know why it's such a big deal, you know.
Well, that's one thing Brexit has done, is that they hadn't got, I think a lot of English people, and we know this from a lot of the news that came out at the time, was that they were just so clueless. But I mean, in fairness, as you said yourself, there's so much stuff that we don't even know, and we're from here. So, you know, we kind of, people living over in England who have their own lives and are getting on with things, I suppose, why would they? But now they kind of have to more, you know, they have more interest, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that seems to be, there was a technical manager on the show, Pete, who was responsible for kind of looking at the technical things around the fence, and he said very honestly to me, he said it was great. Like he really learned a lot from it, and it really got him emotionally. And I think because the play tries to go beyond politics in the sense of this is about two human beings who are in a situation that you can empathize with both of them rather than being, you know, judgmental about where they sit on the political spectrum in a way that you can understand them. And that's the problem with Irish politics, is we don't have that understanding. We put, you know, it's in the green and orange camp, but then it's also in right wing and left wing, and then it's also city and rural, and we kind of put each other as outsiders, and we don't say, oh, you know, I'm not going to actually talk to this DUP voter because what can I ever, you know, what can I actually talk about with them, or how can they ever understand me? And the same for, you know, across the whole political spectrum. So I think that's kind of the tragedy of it as well, is like, you know, how do we make things better, like Sinead's trying to do, if it's always about the numbers game and it's always about winning the game over the other person?
Do you think there's been any improvement over the years? Or do you think there's, well, at the moment, I suppose that's a tough question to answer because of Brexit and everything else. I mean, do you think what way do you think things are going to go? Or do you have any, the $50 million question?
Yeah, I don't know. I think obviously things are better than they were. You know, cross-border initiatives is kind of silly as they were, sometimes have done really important work in the sense of people actually knowing each other and hanging out with each other and talking to each other. And I think especially along the border, in the border areas, the relationships were really good from what I can see. There's a lot of respect there because they both share that feeling of being on the edge and also kind of living next to each other. It's, you kind of have to get on with things because the reality of it is, you know, it's a border area where there's the north and the south, and, you know, people just want the best, they just want what is ever going to give them the best deal. You know, put a few pound in their pocket, give them better phone signal, just give them better lives and give their children better lives. And I think people are willing to compromise and negotiate, and they're not waving flags as much. Whereas in more ghettoized urban centres, it's easier to hold on to those old simple narratives of green and orange because there's no incentive to break out of that. And if you're not neighbours with someone, then you can other them and alienate them. So I think, yeah, there's a long way to go, and I think that I don't know the answers to it, but I do know that it's about recognizing that it's hard work and just keep going in the right direction, and don't ever be complacent about where we've gotten to, because as we know, like, things can slip so easily, and it just takes a matter of months and a few people to really pull you down into something you don't want to be in. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the next few years hold, but they do seem to hold something that's going to happen. There's changes happening, and there's very hard, difficult conversations that need to happen. And I think we all just need to, you know, open up and be respectful of each other, even if we disagree.
Yeah, and I definitely think with our young people, you know, over the years, there's more distance from politics. I mean, I'm actually from Dublin, so I'm not originally from here. But from what I've seen from my children and everything, their friends and everything, I think, and especially with more, you know, we've just opened up, the world has opened up, you know, with travel and with the, you know, the internet and everything. I mean, everything is global now. So people are not as insulated. And I think young people a lot more now kind of couldn't care less. And I know you said in some areas it is bad, but I definitely think that for the majority of young people, you know, they're not really that interested. As you say, they're interested in having the best phone signal and just getting on with things. So hopefully it won't be the politicians that will put the, you know.
Yeah, I think I agree there. I think it's. I don't think any changes, any meaningful changes that happen, I don't think they're actually going to be led by politicians. I don't think it's going to be a top-down thing. I think, as we saw with things like, you know, repeal the eighth, or equal marriage.
Yeah.
You know, progression that has happened in the last few years. It's all happened because of grassroots organizations and people, everyday people just pushing for these things. And then at some point, the politicians jump on the bandwagon. And, you know, I think that any changes that happen in the country will be the same way. It'll be people kind of making connections north and south, east and west, and recognizing that, you know, people in their communities maybe don't have their rights met or need to be protected in a certain way, or even economically, you know, if there's a social enterprise or some businesses that want to club together to make something happen because it'll benefit the town or the village, you know. So I think it'll be small victories like that, so just people trying to make things better together, that'll lead to progress.
Yeah. So you now, what's next on the cards for you? Any more comedies? I know you were working on Soft Border Patrol as well. I know you did work on that before as well. So any more anything funny in the pipeline? Or
we're definitely we've got a few comedy ideas that we're banding around, and we love doing the sort of silly radio sketch stuff. So we'll probably do a bit more of that if there's work, and then there's a couple of funny plays that we've kind of talked about doing, and also just kind of pitching TV shows and films and things like that. So we'll see what happens, but there'll always be an element of comedy there. I don't know about you, but I need to have a laugh. You know, if I want to be entertained and laugh. I don't really want to think about things too harshly or, you know, try and be too serious.
But it's more impactful as well, I think, you know, when you have that mixture, it can be more impactful, you know, because then...
Yeah. It's more like real life as well. I mean, every day is kind of has its ups and downs and its highs and lows, and, you know, people make jokes even when they're in the pit of despair. So I think that, there'll always be comedy there because it's just... It's too good to lose, you know. So, and
it's a very Irish thing. You just reminded me of one particular scene. I'm not going to tell our listeners because I hope they go and see the play. But there's one particular scene that involves Henry telling a quite poignant story about a ring, and there's a line at the end that Sinead interjects, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
you could say she ruins the moment. in a very Irish way.
yeah, and he was all disappointed because he really, you know, he wanted to tell the climax of the story, and a different climax.
I think that I hope our listeners do go and see the play, because it really is very, very, very good. And I suppose having the success that you've had with the work that you've done so far, you know, that must be helpful for you, getting audiences in there and making a name for yourself and getting more work, I suppose.
Well, we're just so grateful that to have been supported, you know, first of all by Prime Cut Productions and the Lyric Theatre, and then also by the audiences who are coming. You know, it's great that people are coming back to the theatre actually, and taking the risk and supporting the artists of this place, because the last 18 months has been a very dark time in the sense of nothing's being made, and people whose livelihoods depend on audiences suddenly now we there might be light at the end of the tunnel, and it really does, especially theatre, live or die on audiences making the journey, and it is a whole evening, like, getting in the car, going to the theatre. Usually you might have to have a meal as well, and you're driving back. It's not easy, but I think that hopefully the show's good enough, and I know that there's many more great shows in the pipeline, both in the Lyric and in all the venues in Belfast. So hopefully the audiences will grow and grow and grow, and we can get back to some kind of new normal territory.
How difficult was it for you during COVID in terms of your work? I mean, you guys must have been completely lost because there was nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it was really scary because I did one day on a show in the Lyric. It was assistant directing, 1984. We did the first day, and then the second day we were told not to come in to the theatre. And then I think a couple of days later, it was very evident that there was a global pandemic happening, and the theatre shut down. And yeah, we didn't know what was happening for many, many months. And it was kind of just everyone kind of on tenterhooks trying to see what was going to happen. So that was very hard. And then, of course, all kind of salary or any payment or jobs, as they all got cancelled, just completely stopped. Nothing was looking like it was going to happen in the future. But also I think Michael and I were very lucky because of this play. We had gotten this commission, and we sort of just put our head down and said, okay, well, this is something we can work on. And who knows if it'll ever go on, but at least we can work on this. And we managed to get a few other gigs and just kind of enough to keep us going, and luckily things have started to open up now, so that the play did go on. So we're just delighted that it's actually happened and that we got through it, and hopefully the industry will that things will get better. This is not going to go away overnight. There's going to be many structural issues around the way that the economy works, and also the way that the arts community is valued in our society, that a lot of people have either had to quit their jobs or move away, and hopefully that can get addressed so that people can continue making great art and telling great stories, because that's kind of that's some of the best stuff that's coming out of where we're from, and it's part of our DNA.
It is part of our DNA. You're right, and I've spoken to so many people for this podcast and outside of the podcast as well about this very thing about the arts and the way the arts needs to be protected and helped, and it really has brought it to light. The whole pandemic has brought to light the way the arts, because they're the last thing to come back. I know people who are musicians. I think your brother is a musician, is he?
That's right. Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends who are as well, and they've just had nothing, no gigs, no nothing, and it's the last thing to come back. But people need to go out and support. Yeah, that's all we can do, is just go. And
as long as things are safe, and you can make sure that you've got your mask or your vaccine passport or whatever it is, and just have good times in a safe way. I think it's about trying to support our artists, and slowly, hopefully, people will be able to build up their livelihoods again. And hopefully people will also have a bit more crack, because sitting in your house for 18 months was not always the most fun thing to do,
Yeah, and the Lyric is such a beautiful theatre as well. It really is.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, well, Oisín, I wish you all the best with the play. I hope it goes really well, because it deserves to. And
thanks so much,
whatever your next venture might be.
I'll keep you posted. I'm not too sure myself, but I'll get the head down and see what I can do. But
definitely.
Thank you for coming, and hopefully some of your listeners will come. The show runs until the 23rd of October in the Lyric. So, and I think there's plenty of seats, because it's all socially distanced as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully people feel safe to go.
Yeah, and they'll definitely, the jokes and everything in there. I mean, there's a lot of belly laughs. There's a lot of serious stuff. But it's really good. Okay, thanks a million, Oisín.
Thanks a million, Lynn.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Oisín, and I hope that you try your best to get out and see the Border Game if you can, because it really is very good, and it definitely was worth the standing ovation that it got the night that I was there. Remember to keep getting all of your news from Armagh Eye, and I hope you join us next time for our podcast.
From the
I don't know what to say. I'm just speechless.
to the
Can't believe it.
we see all sorts of life-changing moments at McKinney Competitions. How would you react? Cars, houses, tech bundles and more from just £2 a ticket. No purchase necessary. For competitions, rules and conditions, see mckinneycompetitions.com.